My name is Diane and I'm proprietor and director of Indigenous Art Mossinson Galleries in Perth, Western Australia. I first met Nara in 1995 when he came down to Perth for his first solo exhibition. He was accompanied on this exhibition by his very good friend Diane, and Jackie officiated with the didgeridoo playing, and Nara came down and was extremely pleased and proud of that exhibition. He also was accompanied in that exhibition by his very good friend Kevin Shaw, the anthropologist, who really was instrumental in facilitating Nara's career and supporting him. We first got to see that Nara was creating anything at all through Kevin Shaw. Kevin was a former patient of mine and approached me to show me some of Nara's work to see if they were of interest. And Nara had himself approached Kevin Shaw to help facilitate an art practice. So the words really that we fondly refer to as in the conversation between Nara and Kevin was Nara going to Kevin to say, I really want to become an artist. And Kevin saying, well, I know nothing about it, I can't really help you. And Nara said, well, you'd better learn. And that was how that relationship began. And Nara's first body of work was an amazing set of coulamons that he carved and painted with ochre on the back. And we went, yes, they were fantastic, please let's encourage Nara in his art practice. And then there was the thought that rather than do carvings, he would like to try and do paintings. And that's how we began, really. And so he started with coulamons, and then the next body of work was all ochre works on canvas, which again were fairly extraordinary and in a very limited amount and quantity. Nara working on paper really was part of the evolution of his practice and how it was. So the first body that he began with was really ochre on canvas, and that's how he wanted to execute his works. And he really was, again, in the body of Australian artists, quite unique in that he had a very broad palette of ochres, and many of them would be many of the colours would just be a rock here or there that he would find as he was wandering through the countryside. So there were unique colours, lovely purples and maroons, which only were found in sufficient amount to be used in one or two paintings. But Nara himself was a perfectionist in his whole art practice. So as he was doing the ochre on canvas works, again there was detailing and finesse and fine details which no other Kimberley artist I think has replicated in what they've done. But there then came a point when he felt that he didn't have the strength and the energy to be able to execute those ochre works on canvas, and very much almost might need to retire from it. And so he did very little for a while, just some sketches actually started with some sketches in drawing books, and that was in fact the next body of work, which were texture sketches on paper. And again, they are in a very limited quantity as well, very fine, but we thought, well, looking at him on paper, maybe we would try and see if he could perhaps do some gouache on paper. So we provided him with some gouache, and he did a very small series, but we then started suggesting and encouraging Nara to do works on canvas, which he relished, loved, embraced, and so for a while he did a body of work on canvas. And for those, interestingly too, he drew still on paper and in a sketchbook the planning for his bigger canvas. But again reached a stage in age and health where he felt that he just couldn't work on canvas any longer. And we sort of retired him out. So unlike some artists who you never really knew when they were going to retire or when they in fact did stop, we did have a retirement date for Nara. But for him, painting was his passion, and as he once said to me, it kept him alive. So we thought, well, we'll just give him some small sheets of paper with some paints and see how he goes with those. And that's how that body of work came about. So although Nara painted a large body of works on paper, many of the works and the stories and the themes he really only painted once. So in particular in the body of work, for example, that's going on show in America, there are paintings in that Nara only addressed the imagery once in his whole body of work, and there are stories that he's told to accompany the works that again he didn't do another painting in his whole body of work addressing that story. So, and some of those stories that are there, like the Shua story, is not well known in mythology or in lore and culture broadly across the Kimberley. So it's only really a very few senior lawmen that had the knowledge, I think, about those stories and had engaged even people to be able to convey those stories to document them. In the body of work that's been included in the exhibition, there are some, I just want to mention, there's some hallmark things that distinguish Nara's work from other artists' works. So firstly, if you look at the imagery, that was something that Nara did really uniquely. His commitment to, his capacity to combine colour in very unusual form, fashions and in form. No other artist, I don't believe, did this in the Kimberley. He worked alone, so he chose the colours in his artworks alone. He had a passion to colour mix, which I don't see reflected in what many other artists did. So I know the initial body of paint that we supplied to him, and I saw back, and it is reflected in the exhibiting works, that there's a lot of colour mixing in there, unique colours, that again, because he mixed those colours just for that body of work, are only in 2 or 3 paintings of the whole exhibition. And he actually referred to it as making his own contract with the paint. So this was something that was really quite particular and skilled with Nara. So the one work that's got the pink with the yellow background tells the story of the Shua bird, and that's a mythological bird that lived in a cave in the remote hills of the Kimberley there in that range. And there's the thought that it was a bird that disciplined, that was a disciplinary bird for the children, so that if children misbehaved, that Shua bird would come down from the cave, pick up the spirits of the children, take them back to the cave, and it was just there as the threat. We had another artist who also painted Shua bird, and Nara and he were friends, but both were amazing custodians of law and culture, so the level of knowledge that they carried was really exceptional beyond others. In the group of exhibiting works there, you've also got some paintings referring to Lagadi, the boab nut, and although he's painted that story a few times more, each has got different iconography. There's one unique work where he's just done the boabs, this one with a tree, all with different colours, all with slightly different graphic. But for him, the boab was really quite an important tree in law and culture. The boab nut was an important food source for them, and it was something that was really quite integral to his life. There's another story that Nara paints called Numengrey, and he actually had painted that in his canvas works, in his ochre work, and also frequently in paper, but again each time with slightly different graphic. Numengrey refers to 2 mountains up in the Napier Ranges, which were related to milk production and a strong place for lactation for women and in their story. Well, he was really quite an extraordinary person, and I think it was our great privilege to work with him, and I don't really think that this earth will see the likes of that sort of man again. So it was, sorry about that. He was a very contained man, but he had an amazing dignity about him. He was polite, respectful, and he had a great sense of humour. He he knew what he wanted professionally and why he was painting. He never painted for money. His driving desire to paint was to leave a legacy behind and leave a visual record accompanied by the anthropological backup and stories that could tell future generations of what there was before in Aboriginal culture and history and law. And I think that was what really originally motivated him to start work and continued to motivate him all through his career. He never was motivated by money, which was a really quite amazing thing. And the other benchmark that he set was his capacity to remain loyal and consistent and have integrity. So when there was many discussions about how one couldn't have expectations of what artists could deliver, when I reflected on the relationship that we had with Nara, it really just made me realise that those that spoke about not having the expectations really hadn't sort of had the experience to discover men that really did know about law and culture. So for example, like Nara knew the contract and the arrangement of how the artworks would go, how the documentation went, and he never wavered from that artist anthropologic representational relationship in the whole of his career. So we are really fortunate to have the whole body of Nara's work and therefore able to make comment on I guess the stories and the work there. So in lots of levels, the standards that Nara set for himself were absolutely excellent and above everybody else. And so therefore, it was an absolute pleasure to work with him. And in Nara's early life, he was born in the bush and then came into sort of station life and started working there. But it wasn't really that satisfactory for him. And when he'd become punished for really some fairly minor transgressions, he ran off into the Mornington Ranges and spent his time there with his grandparents. And so he spent some of his probably teen years as a hunter-gatherer, living a traditional life with his grandparents, who really were responsible for teaching him a lot of the law and culture and where he got his knowledge from. But there came a time in his life as he was, I guess, getting into his 20s or so, that living just with your grandparents wasn't going to be sufficient and he needed to, find a partner, etc. So he came back into station life and began working on the stations. And in that role, I think he became an excellent horseman and was well known for his skills as in the cattle industry, as a drover, as a rider, and what he could do. And it would seem that for some of the artists and many of the people, and for Nara, that life as on the stations was at least a rewarding one in their role there. And Nara himself got to be quite a even leader in the stations that he worked at and was highly respected for his role there. And then, I guess, with time and the changing in the cattle station sort of role with wages coming in and some stations disengaging their staff, many of those people who were used to being really very useful and gainfully employed were left really at quite a loss. So I think for that, and if you look at what life is like for an elderly Indigenous person in a remote town like Derby, there's nothing much to offer. So in your middle 70s, to be able to then become engaged in an art career, it was really quite a, I think, positive experience for Nara. I mean, we refer to it as, the other alternative is just kind of living on the scrap heap of life. And for someone like Nara, where he's so used to being productive and industrious, it wasn't a choice for him. Painting was the choice. That Nara was an artist who really was painting and painted in Australia before his time, or before really the market was ready and receptive to his work. When we worked with him, and we entered him into many art award and art prizes across the country, and he was quite successful in being accepted into many of Australia's leading contemporary art prizes. But I still believe that the imagery that he produced and his type of work was in advance of what Australian contemporary art was ready to accept. And I think they've got, I think Australian contemporary art is still quite controlled with what they look at, and many of the people judging it still lack the broad-mindedness to expand their vision of what should be and what could be. So it's always been a challenge for us to get people to look at Nara's work and see it on all the levels that it works, but most simply as great contemporary art has been a challenge. And so I'd like to finish with, we're very thrilled to have this work chosen to be shown in this exhibition, because it does finally in some ways place him alongside artists who he well deserves to be placed against, and start to put his work into a context internationally. When people look at Nara's work and walk away from it, I would like them to take the joy of looking at the work, understand the intellectual process behind it, and be elevated and feel better for having seen it. When people have seen Nara's work and walk away, I'd like for them to have remained with them the joy of having viewed extraordinary work, have the feeling of their spirit being uplifted as a result of having seen that work. And for us that was always the case, that when Nara's work came in and we saw it for the first time, it was exciting, wonderful. And I think the fact that behind it there are all these other layers, when you walk away you just feel better for having viewed the work for the first time.
That's a wrap.